Welcome and thank you for joining the channel. Please help this channel by liking and subscribing. We really appreciate it. There are no ads on this video. If you have any stories you would like me to share on this channel, comment below and your story will be featured in the video. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy these creepypastas accompanied by rain and thunder. My name is Amelia, and for as long as I can remember, I've suffered from a strange and terrifying affliction. I'm not blind. For me, everything seems normal, but every time I look in a mirror, all I can see is the back of my head. The only upside to my problem is that it makes brushing my hair really easy, but apart from that, it feels like a curse. The older I get, the worse I feel about it. It's really hard for me to explain. People see me, but when they try to explain to me what I look like, the words they use to describe me doesn't seem to exist. It's the same for photos and even drawings of me. For one of my birthdays, my mother hired an artist to draw a portrait of me. My mother thought it would work. She figured if people could paint me with words, they could capture my true appearance on a canvas. The painter she hired was really talented and was famous in our town for being an amazing portrait artist. It didn't take long to see the frustration in the painter's eyes as she sat there for hours trying to draw me. By the time she was done, she had 4 beautiful pictures of the back of my head. Family photos were the worst and most painful for me. Any of the family photos that made the wall had my family smiling proudly at the camera, but all you saw of me was the back of my head. I usually opted out of taking photos. It gets too depressing for me. It kind of feels like I don't exist. I'm present, but I don't have an identity. I've been seeing doctors for years, but no one ever gave me an answer for what might have caused this. I've had brain scans, which always come back normal. I've seen countless psychologists, but they say I'm not crazy because if that was the case, then everyone else would have been crazy as well. The few photos and portraits of me prove it's not just in my head. I always struggle with the sense I didn't belong in this world. I always had a distorted view of the world. My parents put this down to my condition, but I've always felt like the two were interconnected. They were always this dawning feeling of despair where I felt like I wasn't meant to be born or exist between realms of existence. My mother told me it was normal to feel like that. That was your typical teenage existence. But for me, it went a lot deeper than that. It wasn't hormones or a brain injury or a mental defect. For me, it was a terrifying walking nightmare. When I was 17, I had my first school dance, and despite everything, I was excited. My best friend Lily helped me pick out a beautiful dress, a deep blue gown that complemented my long blonde hair. I felt almost normal for once, laughing with her as we styled each other's hair. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe I could blend in with the other girls, that maybe tonight I wouldn't feel so out of place. But as soon as we arrived at the dance, that fragile sense of normalcy began to crumble. That night truly shattered my feeling of belonging when the photographers arrived. Going from group to group, capturing memories. I had been in a small circle of friends when the photographer called us over for a picture. I hesitated, but Lily urged me forward, assuring me that I looked beautiful. We lined up, and for the first time in years, I hoped desperately that maybe this time it would be different. Maybe tonight I would appear like everyone else. But when the photo printed out and made its way around the group, there it was again. The back of my head, while everyone else stood smiling and radiant. The laughter and excitement in my group died, replaced with awkward silence. Lily tried to comfort me, saying it doesn't matter, but I couldn't bear it anymore. I slipped out of the dance hall and walked home. That night solidified the isolation I'd felt for years, but now it was worse. It wasn't just that I felt different, it was that I could never escape it, no matter how hard I tried to fit in. To be seen like everyone else, my reflection would always betray me. By the time I was 18, the feeling of not belonging had all but consumed me. I had spent the entire night hunched over my desk, writing out a farewell letter to my family. My hands shook as I tried to explain the inexplainable. How living like this, always feeling out of place, was unbearable. When I finally finished, I folded the note neatly and left it on my nightstand, taking one last look in the mirror. I silently begged for something, anything to give me a reason to stay, hiding what I was about to do. My father's gun felt heavy in my hands as I pressed it to the roof of my mouth. Without hesitation, I pulled the trigger. I expected darkness and an end, but instead I woke up in my bed. For a moment, I thought the gun had misfired, that maybe I had failed, but there was no blood, no pain, no damage to my face. Everything was entirely calm. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the mirror. When I looked, I froze. A girl stared back at me, wide-eyed and confused. But it wasn't the back of my head, it was me. For the first time, I was seeing myself, my real face. She looked so familiar, yet undeniably me. My hair, my eyes, my features were all there, staring right back at me, like the world had flipped upside down. Panicked, I bolted from my room and raced down the stairs, but something strange caught my eye along the way. The family photos on the wall were all different. Every single person in them was turned away, their faces hidden, showing only the back of their heads, all except me. In each one, I stood facing the camera, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong, like I had always belonged there. It was impossible, and yet there I was, staring at myself in the photos, as if I've always been my reality. As if the entire world had been reversed, and my terrifying thing was that I didn't seem to belong in this world either. There are some things better left unfound. I did not always think this way. As a younger man, I loved exploring abandoned and forgotten places. I loved finding old items that had been left behind by owners long since passed. That's how I came across the Red Book. I found it in a condemned hospital. I used to look up buildings scheduled for demolition so I could go poke around before they were left forgotten. Bloody asking for something like this, I was. I traveled for hours through rural countryside before I found myself in the outskirts of a sizable town. I arrived on a late autumn day and sized up the dilapidated building looming before me. It was a Christian hospital, filled with crosses and portraits of Jesus staring down the cobwebbed walls. The memory of the crucifix hanging above the chapel sticks in my mind, broken and upside down. That's where I found the Red Book, sitting upon the altar. I look back now at how foolish it was, how inviting it must have seemed. I remember the statue of Mary, seeming to bore a pleading stare into me as I took the crimson-bound book. I'm sure this was not the case, but when I think back to the moment, my memory presents her as weeping tears of blood. I opened the book there. The words were written in what I recognized as Latin. I had seen many Christian artifacts before, but something about these pages felt different, heavier. My eyes skimmed the words, and though I could not understand them, I almost could not pull myself away. The air became hazy, and I lost myself for a time. There was a whining in my ears, but when I finally shut the book, it vanished. I do not know what compelled me to take this item. No, that's not true. I have always loved procuring these sorts of things. It has brought me trouble before. It will always bring me trouble. But for this trouble, it had just begun. I took it home and placed it on the bookshelf in my living room. There it stayed, drawing my eyes whenever I walked past it. I eventually took to opening it and gazing at the words that I could make no sense of. The whining would return, growing in intensity. When I focused on it, it sounded like screaming. Unsettled, I hid the book away in the locked chest. I tried to forget about it. I thought about disregarding it, but something inside me revealed the idea. The more I tried to distance myself from it, the more present it became in my mind. The occasional whining in my ear began to trespass on my daily activities. At least, I told myself it was whining, like the tiny sound of tetanus, but I knew what it really sounded like. It was a faint screaming, a canopy of voices all calling out together in agony. Then the nightmares began. The same one, every night, a black figure with the head of a goat. Only 3 eyes where each one should be. It would rumble to me in a language I did not understand. Then I would be presented with the horrors of hell. I would be nailed to a cross, forced to watch as thousands of bodies were mutilated and flayed before my eyes. I witnessed children being ripped from their mother's breasts and, well, let's just not get into detail with that. I saw demons revealing in the violence and viscera. These things I saw every night in my sleep. I began to see the figure in the shadows of my home. I heard the screams constantly, growing in intensity at all times. Despite this, I still hesitated to discard the book. I knew it was the source of my oncoming madness, but somewhere deep in my heart I treasured it. I loved it. Eventually I grew to understand what the beast told me in my dreams. It was always the same. This is your eternity. Your soul is now mine. One night, after such a dream, I woke to find bleeding scratches torn across my face. Terror finally won over. I dug out the book, the bright and deep color of blood, and I took it to the nearest church. It was the middle of the night, but I had a penchant for getting into unlocked places. However, I found a conspicuously convenient unlocked door, and from there I brought the book to the chapel. Looking back, I do not know why I didn't throw away or destroy the book instead. But instead, I brought the red book to the altar and placed it upon it. I looked up, and I saw clear through my haze, blood dripping down the face of the crucified Jesus above the altar. I fled then. A sea of emotions inside me, shame and fear mixed with a dark excitement. I could not place why at the time, but looking back, I fear the feeling was not my own. 2 days later, the church burned, killing dozens inside. I do not remember where I was that day. There were clothes in my closet that reeked of gasoline. That was years ago. I have since moved away. I still have nightmares. I still hear the screams. I have told a few of my story, and those who have heard it say that they began hearing the same distant screams in the days following my tales. They tell me of the dreams of the beast, so I tell it now, against my own judgment, against my own will. There is something within that desires this tale to be spread, something that wishes for all to feel as I do. Desperate, terrified, and elated. So if you ever hear the screams, stop reading. You might be shouting, they're just pranking you. That was what I thought when I first arrived. 1 hour later, I'm boxed in an in-suite with nothing at my disposal but weak phone reception and weaker ideas. I'll make this post brief, as I very much doubt I have a lot of time before the bathroom door parts with the frame. Before the formless man makes his way in here, I've already seen him do things that defy explanation. I'm praying that one of you knows how to save me. Austin, Jack joyously announced, greeting me at the door with open arms. He was the only person I knew at the party, but most of the faces in that common room were familiar. I joined a tightly packed cluster of students by the kitchen counter, a circle of 10 people. Once Jack and I had joined the group, 10 people to my eyes. Anyway, I know that because I counted each of us again, and again, and again. I wanted to ensure that I hadn't lost my mind after Jack announced an invisible 11th person wedged between Alexandra and Tegan. And that's Lucas, he said. Still, after 20 or 30 minutes of conversation, I had forgotten about my friend's gesture towards the empty spot, dismissed it as an odd movement, and I summoned the courage to make conversation with Tegan. So, why did you choose law? I asked her. Tegan smiled. Overbearing parents. Dad said I'd be putting my brain to waste if I were to take journalism, but I'm not planning on becoming a lawyer. So I'd call this a bigger waste of time. Shit, I said. That sucks. She shrugged. What about you? I asked the other girl. Alex answered, well, unlike Teagues, I do want to become a lawyer, but my story is boring. You should hear why Lucas has taken this course. Then the other visible people in the circle all turned to face that gap between Alexandria and Tegan once more. I was left dumbfounded. Sure, I'm aware that we're all still young and immature. Everyone at this party is a first-year university student, after all. But we hardly know each other. This is a socializing event for freshers. A mixer, whatever you would want to call it. And I don't doubt that so many people would be this cruel. Why would a group of 50-something law students collaborate to torment, at random, a stranger named Austin? It's not as if I've done anything to warrant such mistreatment. We've only been studying here for a little over a month, and I've been sitting quietly in lectures. Those were the thoughts coursing through my mind in the simultaneous jumble as the other visible folk listened to a silent story. Listened and laughed as an unseen person told them something. Something that they all heard, but I did not. He cracks me up. Jack whispered to me as members of the group had a one-way conversation with air. I nodded my head slowly, unsure as to what I should say. I must have turned a ghostly shade because my friend frowned at me. "You alright, man?" he asked. "You're usually a bit cheerier than this. Too much pre-drinking before we arrived?" I cleared my throat, speaking quietly whilst the others communed with the ghost. "I don't understand this Lucas thing. Is it a game?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "Fucking hell, Austin, you really are wasted. Maybe have a glass of water or something." Then all eyes in the circle turned to me. There followed an awkward pause, and Tegan started to match Jack's frown. "You okay, Austin?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." Tegan nodded, then she and a few others turned back to the Lucas-shaped hole, the missing link in the chain. A couple of seconds later, those heads had returned to face me as if waiting for my response. Several members of the circle were scowling at me. "Why are you ignoring him?" a student named Colin asked. "Lucas asked you a question, Austin." I tugged at my shirt, feeling my perspiring neck starting to redden. The fabric was coarse, but fear was the thing that had slithered under my collar, irritated my skin. This wasn't social anxiety. There was something entirely wrong about the room's atmosphere. I'd felt that way before. Jack even introduced me to Lucas. I felt off. Even the dozens of people who weren't standing in the kitchen weren't making conversation with Lucas. Seemed to converse and talk with an erratic, unsustainable energy. I got snippets of the conversations that I shouldn't have been able to hear, but every voice in the common room was unbearably loud, and a key word kept spilling out of the mouths from all corners of the party. Shrine. Jack was right. I'm often an extrovert, sociable chap, but not tonight. Since showing up at this place, I've felt only the primal urge to run. "Listen, guys," I eventually said, while backing out of the circle. "I just need some air." As I walked towards the door, I heard a couple of students chuckle at something that was invisible, inaudible. "I'm sure you'll get your answer eventually," Colin whispered to thin air in an odd tone. Once outside, taking in the crisp autumn breeze, I seriously considered going home. That was about 30 minutes ago. And I wish I'd just done it. I wish I just ran for my life. That was my only chance. Things had changed when I re-entered the building. The eerie atmosphere had been polluted with something new. Everything was quiet, not quite silent, but hushed. And the thought of a practical joke, some grand conspiracy to humiliate me, returned to my mind. The possibility that everybody was laughing at me. That would have been simpler. Just some light hazing, but I returned to find the 50 or so party guests clumped together, all facing a white wall at one side of a large room, a wall with nothing at all to display upon it. Jack beckoned me over before lifting a finger to his lips. "What's happening now?" I whispered. "Just watch the film," Jack quietly replied with a heavy whisper. But there was no film. only that empty wall which had transfixed everyone in the common room. Chest thumping, I noticed that Alexandra, a few rows ahead, was facing the wrong way and twitching vigorously. Her nostrils bled, but that wasn't why I moaned in terror. It was the gunk oozing from her eye socket. Not blood, but lumpy waves of pinkish gray wrapping around her eyeballs and spilling down her cheeks. As if Alexandra's very brain was itching to escape her skull. It's not that, I lied to myself, mouth half open in some state of paralysis. Then I began to croak. What the fuck is... A hand slapped against my lips, clamping them tightly together, and I turned to find Jack silencing me, though he still looked at the wall ahead. Still sobbed and sniffled with joy as if he had, and dozens of others watched an imaginary film at the front of the room. I released a muffled gasp as I noted that the trickles of gray spilling from his own pores. Lucas wants quiet, Jack whispered. I was too frightened to move, too frightened of what the hypnotized members of the crowd might do to me, frightened of my own innards fleeing from my body. Then, after half an hour of watching nothing, there came a new horror from the front of the crowd. Directly ahead of me, in the front row of the audience, two side-by-side students crumbled to the ground, their bones shattered, bodies imploded. The sounds of crunching and splashing. I don't know how else to describe whatever the fuck I saw. A spectre scrunched their very skeletons inwards like balls of paper. And then the same happened to two audience members in the second row now. The third followed. Something was flattening bodies to create a path, parting the crowd and forming a direct line towards me. He asked you a question, Jack groaned. My friend had finally turned to face me. I ran towards the building's still ajar front door, ran as fast as my legs would carry me, but it was no use. A gust slammed the door shut, and it wouldn't open. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how forceful I tugged, I was trapped in the hallway. When the crunch of compression carpet sounded behind me, I stopped rattling the door handle, stopped and turned to see recesses forming in the carpet, the shapes of loafers or misshapen feet. These were the only physical indicators I had seen of Lucas' existence, other than the trail of crumpled corpses and the supernatural door slam. But as he walked towards me, the man's form remained unseen. His voice remained unheard, and I saw only the dozens of partygoers standing in the common room behind him, tightly huddled together. No longer watching Lucas's invisible film on the white wall, their heads were turned to the right. They were turned right towards me. I dashed upstairs. There was no other way past the thing in the corridor and no escaping out the front door. I entered a hallway with dorm rooms on either side and I hurriedly tried handle after handle. Stairs creaked below, one after the other. Slowly, by some miracle, I eventually found an unlocked room, so I scurried inside and locked the door behind me. That didn't feel safe enough. Of course, I locked myself in an in-suite for good measure. I don't know what Lucas asked. I don't know what Lucas might be. All I know is that he's still out there, either searching or waiting, and I need help before he finds me. I think death would be more merciful than hearing Lucas's question, or even seeing his face.